One of my missions is my full mission, my goal is to tell people about World War II because we're passing away so fast that it's history, ancient history almost. And so I publish books at a loss and sell them at a loss, but I enjoy it so much because I'm educating people. I'm an old school retired school teacher. I was a primary grade teacher, so in elementary school you don't talk a lot about death and tricks and etc. So for 37 years I kept my mouth shut. But after I retired, I decided I'd write my diary, and therefore my first book is practically my diary. But I did 20 missions on a B-17, the 8th Air Force, out of I, England, 490th Bomber Group, Squadron 848. We no longer have an active internet program. They've given it up. But I did manage to find a book that some of the men had published. Maybe 40 years ago, he asked all the survivors to write some of their memories of the most worst missions and the most dangerous missions. Well, there's so many different ways you can be killed in wartime, and flying missions triples that. There are examples of planes exploding in midair, planes exploding on takeoff, planes failing to get takeoff. And because when you load a B-17 full of 10 men and all the ammunition and a load of bombs, you've got a tremendous amount of weight to get into the air. And usually, we had 40 heavy bomber bases in England. Plus, England had their own bomber bases. And so you can see that runways were short, concrete was heavy, and we built most of our own airfields, and they were always they were always given to England immediately when they were called RAF fields. And so when you think about it, in combat, you knew you were going to run into flak. The exploding shells were going to be all around you at different places, and especially over the target when you flew right into it. And then you knew you were going to have enemy combat fighters hunting for you, and you knew you were going to fly into that target, and the flak was going to surround you, and a lot of guys were going to get hurt, because an aluminum bomber doesn't stop slugs of steel from the exploding flak shells. But there are other dangers, like you could be killed on the ground. There could be a fire, an explosion. One time when we lined up for takeoff, every plane was behind the other one, right on the runway, ready to go, and we went about every 2 or 3 minutes. And so if a guy in front of you had trouble, you had trouble. And if he didn't clear it, or if he had to ditch on the side, he knew he wasn't going to make it. Could be explosion very easily, or tremendous crashes. And but one of the things that we really dreaded was flying in formation. You flew very close together. You had 12 planes over here and 12 planes right here in the middle and 12 planes over here. So you had 36 planes. Now the plan was to fly as closely together as you can, because you could keep the enemy fighters from coming down. If they got into the formation, you were in trouble, because our gunners could not shoot at that plane while he was in the middle of us. And so flying very close together was a requirement. My first experience with that was about the 5th or 6th mission. They assigned 12 new crews to our B-17 base, and we had to teach them to fly in formation. And the problem was doubled, because these 12 pilots had never flown in formation, and they had never flown a B-17. They had trained in the States on B-24s, and so they're, and then guess what? We had to train them because we didn't want to fly with anybody. I say we, I mean the pilots of, I usually refer to we as the pilots of the plane, but I was the radio operator gunner. I sat behind the bomb bay. So I had nothing to do with it except to say yes sir, no sir. But we had to train these guys. First we had to train them to fly the B-17, and we had to train them to fly in formation. Well, learning to fly the B-17, they did a lot of that on their own, practice missions. But learning to fly in formation, we had to go with them and teach them. So we had skeleton crews. And they picked our crew, and they picked the radio operator, the navigator, pilot, bombardier, and just the main guys that had to teach. And why, I don't know, but we had nothing to do with flying, but there we were, so they picked us. They picked 12 planes, 12 different pilots, 12 different planes, experienced to fly with these greenhorns. Now that they had learned to fly the B-17, and we had to teach them the formation. And so the skeleton crews were always leery of that because we knew how dangerous it was. And a lot of these guys had a lot of missions already completed, and they were safe that far. And so they wanted to keep flying in formations and keep doing the missions and go home. Well, here we go with 12 skeleton crews get on board with these guys in their new B-17s, and we fly in formation. And it was sometime early January in 44, early January 45, yeah. And so the formation mission practice was on. And as I said, we were all leery, we were all worried about it. But we went up with the 12 planes and we formed a little miniature formation, and we were flying as closely as we could. And everything was going pretty well. We practiced most of the morning, probably 3 or 4 hours. We practiced forming formations and getting out of formation and back into formation. And then on the way home, they said, okay, you've had enough practice. We'll do this again sometime. And so on the way home, we were flying the top, and then in the middle, I could look out down and see the middle and the bottom, lower, from the radio room. And you could see this one guy come up, and they crashed right in the middle with the 12 planes. And so that story was, I got that from the story from our manual, our story that I had. And I saw them crash, and I saw both of them go down, just cut in half and explode. And I had the individual stories of one guy just said he was back in the waist, and when it cut apart, he just put his shoe on and stepped out. It was like he stepped off a diving board, and he got away from it. And the other guy, the pilot of that one plane, this was his third mid-air collision. He got out. He's a little bitty guy. He got out. So I got his story, and I got a radio operator from another plane's story. So that's the kind of thing I do. I put all the short stories together from one incident. But when we landed, the guy on my plane, the navigator, just said, somebody said, "What are we doing?" And he said, "I'm getting the hell out of here." And everybody bolted. The survivor just bolted, and we're not going back up there. And so that was the day we lost 2 of the new planes right off the bat. They never flew a mission. The story continues the fact that when you did fly a bombing mission, the new people were always in the back. And so the veterans were up front, and the new people always got the oldest plane. So to backtrack a minute, on our first mission, we got an old plane that didn't fly quite right, and we were dragging behind. December the 5th, 44. And we were going out, and our first mission was Berlin. Now, you couldn't pick a worse place to put 10 or 12 men. And we were greenhorned. Our very first mission, we were at the tail end Charlie, back in, they called it tail end Charlie or Coffin Corner, because the fighters could always come up and get you. They got the guys in the back. And the veterans who flew very close together were here in the front, and everybody kept praying that they would be the ones that would survive. And so that's kind of the background of the fact that collisions can happen any place. A guy can have trouble, and if one guy has trouble and you're all flying side by side, we could look out and wave at the guy next door, and we could give him a thumbs up. The fighter pilots would come in, our fighter pilots, our protectors, our little friends, could come in close to our formation, and we could wave to the P-51 pilots. We never saw them. We didn't know them because they were based in Europe. We had taken enough land in Belgium, and we had bases down there for them. We came out of England, and they'd pick us up. So we were still flying very close together, bang, 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 and we were, the formation was your protection, and the tighter you flew together, the less likely you were to be hit by German fighters, because they knew when they came in that every plane had 13 machine guns on it. And they knew when they came in at us, those would all they knew where the range of fire was for each position. So they knew that they had a handful, but if they could get inside that formation. Later on, the German pilots decided, the rule came out sort of a suicide mission. If you get hit, or if you're out of gas, or your plane is wounded or dead, crash into the B-17 and bail out. Try to hit him on the tail or something and bail out. And so that's another story that I thought I was going to talk about. But it's like on this collision deal, I've got to go ahead and say that the day we didn't fly, our buddy crew did fly. And these are the guys we trained with in the States, and we knew them real well. And they were coming back from a mission. And when you're up at 20,000 or 25,000 feet looking for fighters, well, you tighten that formation up. But the prop wash of all the planes and all the vapors and the clouds and et cetera caused a mid-air collision right in the middle of our buddies' formation. They were in it. They were it. And they must have been flying in the second element, but a guy lost it, and he came up, and a co-pilot on this plane looks out and sees him coming up. Co-pilot, sitting on the right side, sees this guy coming up, and they hit, and this plane goes down. But as this plane goes down, our plane, the third motor on the surviving plane, our buddy's plane, sucked the body of the radio man out of this plane into the nose. Well, as they sucked him in, it tore out the nose of his plane and banged him up, banged up the navigator, and then it went down. Well, he was laying in there, the toggle air was lying in the nose. Navigator was wounded over here, and then toggle air saw his own legs laying across his lap. But they weren't his legs. And as he came to and the navigator brought him back, they were the legs of the radio man from the other plane. So when they landed, they actually had an extra man on the plane, extra body, torso only. Everything else had been cut off by the props. But they managed to make it back to Belgium and drop down out of the formation. And the only man wounded, the navigator, was halfway out of the plane, but he managed to get back in. And the Togolier was the only man wounded. So when they did manage to land, we have to switch to the co-pilot story. But they managed to land in Belgium, and the co-pilot told me that his side of the story, what he saw. He saw the plane coming up, he saw it go down, etc. And he was paralyzed. He didn't know what to do. But between him and the pilot, they made it back to Belgium. And the wounded Togolier was up there freezing to death with all glass out of the nose, you know, and the navigator also. When they landed in Belgium, they had one chance to make it. The plane was just out of gas and everything else, and the nose completely out of it, so you know what the temperature was. So they had one run, and the co-pilot and pilot said, "Okay, we got to go," and they made it down to ground. And the only man really wounded was the Togolier. So they left him there, and he told about being so big gash in his head, being sewn back up by somebody with a needle like a tailor, and spending a week there in the hospital. Everybody else went back on another plane, and so after about a week, Togolier was able to rejoin his crew. Guys on other planes, they tell me what they saw, and they repeat what the cause was, et cetera, and et cetera. But they verify everything. And then the co-pilot decided he would write his story. So I added it to the Togolier story. And so his side verified everything that happened. It was not their fault. It was the guy below that came up's fault. They all died on that plane. But the radio operator was sucked into the nose, had a twin brother, and they had both gone through radio school at Scottsfield, Illinois, and the other brother had already been killed when this guy got killed. And so later, one of their sisters tried to contact the co-pilot. She saw his story somewhere, maybe in my book, I don't know, and get the story. So, and then a little bit more later, more guys on other planes began to tell their version of it. First they tried to blame it on our buddy's pilot, the surviving pilot, because he was alive. So they're going to blame the crash on him. But everybody else verified the fact that it was the weather and the conditions, and somebody got out of place. So collisions are one thing that you could do absolutely nothing about except pray. So that was my two examples with mid-air collisions. And they're very, you can't imagine what you feel, because you look out and you see everybody all around you. Everybody going the same speed, you hope. You hope nobody gets hit and falls out of it. And so that's that type of way of getting. There's so many ways you can die without actually being shot. You can die from the flak, you can die from fighter bullets, or you can die from all kinds of these accidents.